The wind on the Coronado Range had teeth that morning, the kind that bit through canvas and pride alike. And Staff Sergeant Lena Rios was kneeling in the dust trying to swap a fouled target paper when a shadow longer than any man had a right to cast fell across her boots. She did not look up at first. She had learned, across 11 years and 3 deployments, that looking up too quickly told a man you were waiting for permission. So she finished folding the torn silhouette, tucked it under her knee, and only then raised her eyes to the figure standing between her and the sun. He was tall, weather-cured, beard salted at the edges, and he was holding out a rifle she recognized only from photographs and whispered envy. A SEAL's personal issue MK-18, scuffed where his thumb had worn the rail smooth. He did not smile. He did not explain. He simply said, in a voice as quiet as a closing door, "Try mine," and stepped back into the wind to let her shoot. What do you do when the man everyone in the lane has been waiting to impress decides, without a word, that you are the one worth handing his weapon to? And tell me honestly in the comments below, would you have taken the rifle, or would you have walked away? Lena Rios had not come to Coronado to be noticed. She had come because the Marine Corps Scout sniper community, the small and stubborn brotherhood she had bled into for nearly a decade, had finally cracked open a slot for a joint marksmanship evaluation, and her battalion commander had written her name on it in pen instead of pencil. That meant something. Pen meant he was not going to erase her when the phone call started, and the phone calls always started. She had grown up in Laredo, the daughter of a long-haul trucker and a hospital cafeteria supervisor, and the first time she had ever held a rifle was at 12 years old, on her grandfather's ranch outside Cotula, where he had pressed an old bolt action into her shoulder and told her in Spanish that the trigger was a promise, not a question. She had carried that sentence with her into the recruiter's office at 17, into boot camp at Paris Island at 18, and into the brutal 11-week sniper course at Quantico at 24, where she had been one of 3 women to attempt it that year and the only one to pin the HOG tooth at graduation. None of that had made her loud. If anything, it had made her quieter, because she had learned early that the women who survived in the long gun world were the ones who let their groupings speak before their mouths did. At 31, she was a staff sergeant with 2 combat tours in Helmand and 1 rotation through the Horn of Africa, and she had stopped counting the times a stranger at a range had asked her, gently, if she was sure she was in the right lane. She had stopped getting angry about it too. Anger wasted breath, and breath was what she traded for accuracy. On the morning the SEAL stepped into her peripheral vision, she had been at Coronado for 4 days, attached as a cross-service observer to a Naval Special Warfare Advanced Marksmanship package. And she had spent every one of those days being politely overlooked. The instructors had not been cruel. They had simply assumed, the way men in tight communities always assume, that the Marine Staff Sergeant with the long braid and the worn-out cry pants was there to take notes. She had taken notes. She had also been out shooting 2 of their junior operators on the unknown distance lane for 3 consecutive relays, and she suspected, though she could not yet prove it, that someone with stars on his collar had finally started to notice. The man holding out the MK-18 was Senior Chief Daniel Vance, though Lena would not learn his name for another 6 minutes. She knew what he was the moment she registered the way he stood, the soft economy of a body that had spent 20 years learning not to waste a single motion. And she knew the rifle by the suppressor and the worn aim point that had clearly been zeroed and re-zeroed on 3 continents. She also knew, with the cold clarity that came to her only in the half-second before a shot, that every single person on the firing line behind them had stopped breathing to watch what she would do next. Refusing would have been easy. Refusing would have been the safe Marine answer, the polite cross-service answer. The answer that protected her from the inevitable conversation in the chow hall about the woman who had grabbed for a SEAL's weapon like she had something to prove. Taking it would be worse. Taking it meant that if she missed, if she pulled the first round low and right the way nervous shooters always did with an unfamiliar trigger, she would not just embarrass herself. She would embarrass every female Marine who had ever knelt on a firing line and asked, silently, to be measured by the same ruler. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the promise in the trigger. Then she reached up, took the rifle by the handguard with both hands, and felt the weight of it settle into her bones like something that had always belonged there. Vance did not say anything else. He stepped back exactly 4 paces, The same distance a coach takes when he wants a shooter to forget he is there, and he folded his arms across his chest and waited. The range safety officer, a young lieutenant who looked like he had not slept in 2 days, opened his mouth to object, glanced at Vance, and closed it again. Lena dropped into a kneeling supported position, found her natural point of aim on the 200-yard steel, and exhaled the long, slow breath her first instructor at Quantico had called the surrender breath, because you had to give up everything inside you, every worry and every audience, before the rifle would give you back the shot. She squeezed. The steel rang. She squeezed again, transitioned to the 300 plate, and the steel rang a second time, and a third, and a fourth. And somewhere behind her a junior operator muttered something that sounded a great deal like Jesus. She fired 11 rounds that morning and put 10 of them on steel between 200 and 500 yards, and the one she missed she called before the spotter did, low left. The trigger brake a hair faster than she had expected on an unfamiliar weapon. When she cleared the rifle and handed it back to Senior Chief Vance. But first, bolt locked to the rear. He took it the way a man takes something he has just lent to an equal, and he said only, "You shoot like someone taught you right." She told him about her grandfather. She did not tell him about Quantico or Helmand, or the lieutenant colonel in 2019 who had written in her evaluation that she was technically proficient but emotionally unsuited for sustained sniper employment. A sentence she had memorized the way other people memorized prayers. Vance nodded once and walked away, and that should have been the end of it, the kind of small-range moment that becomes a story you tell at a retirement party 15 years later. It was not the end of it. That afternoon, the package's lead instructor, a master chief named Holloway who had not spoken 3 sentences to her in 4 days, came to find her at the cleaning tables and asked her, without preamble, if she would be willing to run the next morning's stalking lane as a demonstrator for the junior class. She understood what he was offering. He was offering her the floor. He was offering her the chance to teach men who had spent the week assuming she was furniture, and he was doing it because Vance had said something to him in the quiet way senior chiefs say things, and because the scores on the unknown distance lane had finally made their way up the chain. She said yes. She said yes the way she had said yes to every hard thing in her career, with a small nod and a tightening in her stomach and the absolute private certainty that she would rather die than fail in front of an audience. That night, in the transient barracks, she laid out her ghillie and her veil and her drag bag on the concrete floor, and she went through every piece of it the way a priest goes through vestments, checking the stitching on the burlap, the tension on the rifle drag strap, the seating of the rounds in her magazines. She thought about the women who had come before her, the WACs and the Waves, and the first female Marines through infantry training, and she thought about the women who would come after, the ones who would never know her name and would never need to, and she promised the empty room that she would not waste the floor she had been given. Then she slept 4 hours, which was one more than she usually got the night before a shoot, and she woke up before her alarm with her hands already steady. The stalking lane at Coronado ran 600 meters through scrub and low dune, and the rule was simple and merciless. The shooter had to crawl from a marked start point to a firing position of her own choosing, take 2 shots on a target observed by 2 instructors with binoculars from a tower, and do all of it without being seen. If the instructors spotted her at any point in the crawl, the run was over. If she fired and they could not locate her muzzle signature within 30 seconds, she passed. It was the oldest test in the sniper world, and it had not gotten easier since the Second World War, because the ground did not care what year it was. Lena began her crawl at 0700 with the sun still low enough to be useful, and she gave herself 2 hours, which was generous, because she had learned in Hellman that the patient stalker lived and the hurried one did not. She moved on her elbows and the insides of her knees, the way her first stalking instructor had taught her, keeping her hips lower than her shoulders so her silhouette never broke the line of the brush. She froze twice when she felt the wind shift, because moving with the wind at your back carried sound forward. And she rerouted once around a patch of brittle yucca that would have crackled under her chest plate. The junior class was watching from the tower with the instructors, and she knew it, and she let herself forget it, because the lane did not care about audiences either. At the 90-minute mark, she found her firing position behind a low hummock with a single creosote bush for vertical break, and she built her hide the way her grandfather had built his deer blinds. Slowly, and with respect for the ground she was borrowing. She ranged the target at 480 meters, dialed her dope, settled into her natural point of aim, and waited for the wind to give her the window she wanted. When it came, she took both shots inside of 4 seconds, and she did not move afterward, not to celebrate, not to check, not even to wipe the sweat that was running into her left eye. She lay there for 11 more minutes while the instructors swept the lane with their glass and failed to find her. And when the tower finally called to run, she crawled out backward the same way she had come in, because the lane was not over until she was off it. The junior class was silent when she stood up. Master Chief Holloway met her at the start point with a canteen and a look she would remember for the rest of her career, and he said, loud enough for every man on the tower to hear, "That, gentlemen, is how it is done." The thing about being the example, Lena would later tell a young corporal at Lejeune who asked her for advice over coffee, is that it does not feel like victory in the moment. It feels like exposure. She spent the rest of that week at Coronado being asked questions she had been waiting 11 years to be asked, questions about her dope card, her breathing cadence, her preferred mill holds for crosswind at extended range, and she answered every one of them with the same flat honesty she would have given a fellow Marine. Because she had decided long ago that she would not perform for men who had finally decided to listen. Senior Chief Vance found her again on the last evening, at the small outdoor smoke pit behind the team house, where the operators went to talk without being overheard. And he did not hand her a rifle this time. He handed her a cup of coffee and a folded piece of paper with 3 names on it, instructors at 3 different advanced courses across the joint community. And he said that any one of them would take a phone call from her, and that she should make the calls. She asked him, quietly, why he had stepped back that first morning, why he had handed her the MK-18 in front of a full firing line and walked away without saying a word. He looked at the dark line of the Pacific for a long time before he answered. He told her that he had watched her shoot for 3 days from the back of the range, and that he had recognized something in the way she set her cheek weld. A particular kind of stillness he had only ever seen in shooters who had been doubted for a long time and had decided to stop arguing about it. He told her that he had 2 daughters at home, 10 and 13, and that the older one had asked him last Christmas whether girls could be SEALs, and he had not had a good answer for her then. But he thought he might have one now. He told her that handing her the rifle had not been a gift. It had been a request. He was asking her, on behalf of every kid like his daughter who would ever hear someone say that a certain door was not for them, to go through the door and leave it open. Lena did not cry. She had not cried in uniform since 2014, and she was not going to start at a smoke pit in Coronado. But she folded the paper with the 3 names on it into the chest pocket of her blouse, the one over her heart, and she told the senior chief that she would make the calls. And she would walk through the door, and she would leave it open as wide as she could. She meant it. She has kept meaning it every day since. She made the calls. The first one led to a slot at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course at Fort Bragg, where she became the second woman in the course's history to earn the graduation patch. And the second led, 18 months later, to an instructor billet at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, the same brick building where she had once been the only woman in her class. She taught there for 3 years. She taught the surrender breath the way her first instructor had taught it to her, and she taught the promise in the trigger the way her grandfather had taught it to her, and she taught, more quietly, the lesson she had learned on the firing line at Coronado, which was that leadership in the sniper community was not about being the loudest voice or the fastest shooter. It was about recognizing, in another human being, the stillness that came from having been doubted, and choosing to hand them the rifle anyway. She kept Vance's folded paper in her wallet, behind her military ID, even after the ink had faded and the creases had softened into cloth. She mentored 14 female Marines through the sniper pipeline during her instructor tour, and 11 of them graduated, and the 3 who did not graduate were not pushed out for being women, which was a sentence she could finally say without bitterness because she had helped make it true. She deployed one more time, to a place she still does not name, and she came home with her hearing slightly worse, and her sleep slightly thinner, and her conviction completely intact. When she finally retired as a master sergeant at 22 years of service, the ceremony was held outdoors at Quantico on a cold March morning. And the man who pinned her retirement medal on her chest was a gray-bearded senior chief named Daniel Vance, who had driven up from Virginia Beach the night before and who said almost nothing during the ceremony, because senior chiefs say things in the quiet way, and because he and Lena had long since stopped needing words for the things that mattered between them. In the front row, his older daughter, now 23 and wearing the gold bars of a newly commissioned Navy ensign, sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the woman at the podium. And she was not crying either, because she had been raised by a man who had taught her, by example, that doors were for walking through. What Lena Rios learned on that wind-bitten morning at Coronado, and what she spent the rest of her career trying to pass on, is that the most powerful act of leadership is almost never loud. It is a senior chief stepping back 4 paces and folding his arms. It is a master chief saying, "Gentlemen, that is how it is done." It is a Marine staff sergeant kneeling in the dust to swap a target paper and deciding, when the rifle is offered, that her doubt is a smaller thing than her duty. The military teaches discipline and marksmanship and tactics, and those things matter, but the deeper lessons of a long career in uniform are quieter than that. They are about resilience, the kind that does not announce itself. They are about teamwork, which sometimes looks like silence and sometimes looks like a folded piece of paper with 3 names on it. They are about the core values, honor and courage and commitment, which are not slogans painted on a wall, but daily decisions made by tired people in unglamorous places. And they are about the simple, stubborn truth that the people who change a community are rarely the ones who shout at it. They are the ones who shoot straight, who keep their word, who recognize stillness in others, and who hand over the rifle and step back. Lena Rios is a composite of women who are real, who are still serving, and who are still being doubted on firing lines from Coronado to Quantico to places without names. If her story moved you, tell us in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Share this with a young woman who needs to hear that the door is open. And remember the promise her grandfather taught her, the one she carried for 22 years. The trigger is a promise, not a question. So is your life. Pull it with care.